Joining me now is someone who does actually represent parts of the Bronx, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's good to see you, Congresswoman. I should note the rally is technically in Richie Torres' district, just to be clear on the district lines. What do you think about a big Donald Trump rally in the Bronx?
I mean, I think, as you mentioned earlier, this guy is stuck in court. And let's be very clear about the fact that he is stuck in court because over hush money payments for in order to quiet the story about him having sex with Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the in the lead up to the election. And I think that because he is stuck on so many charges around fraud and these payments, he is stuck in a pretty tight radius of where he can go. New York City's blue, Brooklyn is blue, Queens is blue, the Bronx is blue, and he's got nowhere to go. And so he's decided to come to the South Bronx. He's broke. He needs to pay these legal funds and, bussing people in order to get those donations so that he can funnel them to his legal fees is kind of his business right now. I
will say Crotona Park is quite nice. I think it once had a reputation for being pretty ragged, but it's quite nice. And I'm hoping that the many people coming down from Westchester get a moment to appreciate the beauty and splendor of our borough of the Bronx, which is indeed a beautiful place.
Well, I can tell you that the Green New Deal investments that we have secured through community project funds have absolutely beautified everywhere from Pelham Bay Park, Crotona Park, and Throgs Neck as well.
Spoken like an incumbent running for re-election. Let me ask you this, Congresswoman. We just had this news about Samuel Alito. And I think all of us are there's a little bit of sort of banging your head against the wall, like, okay, what now? And a feeling like the affirmative decision to fly these flags feels like some form of taunting. I mean, he could just not do it. You could just sit in your house and write Dobbs. Like, you don't have to fly any flags. You got a lot of power. What do you see as your role as a Democratic member of Congress in a Democratic House majority with respect to this court, specifically Alito and more broadly?
Well, I mean, I don't even think that we have to wait until we have a Democratic House majority because we have a Democratic Senate majority. And this is an alarm that I've been sounding for quite some time now. I think that what we are seeing here is an extraordinary breach of not just the trust and the stature of the Supreme Court, but we are seeing a fundamental challenge to our democracy. Samuel Alito has identified himself with the same people who raided the Capitol on January 6th and is now going to be presiding over court cases that have deep implications over the participants of that rally. And while this is the threat to our democracy, Democrats have a responsibility for defending our democracy. And in the Senate, we have gavels. There should be subpoenas going out. There should be active investigations that are happening. And I believe that when House Democrats take the majority, we are preparing and ensuring to support the broader effort to stand up our democracy. But I also believe that when Democrats have power, we have to use it. We cannot be in perpetual campaign mode. We need to be in governance mode. We need to be in accountability mode with every lever that we have. Because we cannot take a Senate majority for granted, a House majority for granted, or a White House for granted. Every single minute matters, and we have to use our power when we have it.
Joining me again, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who sits on the House Oversight Committee and had that exchange with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, in some ways, there's a fair amount of theater and performance, I think, on Capitol Hill, but also I could sense in you in that moment, like, genuine outrage at what was being done. What is your takeaway from that moment and more broadly, the kind of culture of the place that seems to cultivate those sorts of antics?
Yeah, I mean, well, first and foremost, I know that a lot of folks kind of saw these clips going around that were often highlights of what had happened. But a lot of that was a result of structural changes that Republicans decided to make in real time to essentially throw out the House handbook that, frankly, and the House rules for committee guidance and for committee conduct through a vote. There was actually a procedural vote in which every single Republican went down the line and decided to vote that the comments that Marjorie Taylor Greene, the disgusting comments that she made about Representative Crockett, were in fact above board and acceptable, which is rather unprecedented in the House. These rules are, they were established in the 1800s, shored up in the 1800s, after the caning involving Charles Sumner in the Senate, precisely designed to de-escalate a political culture of violence when things get too hot. And in fact, when I was a freshman coming into the House, the rules were so widely respected that there would be motions to strike a member's words, even if they just spoke in the second person and used the word you instead of the gentleman from so-and-so. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, her acting, you know, like the ogre in that role is not surprising. What is surprising is Chairman Comer allowing that to be the conduct of, and not just him, but every single Republican, surprisingly, except for Representative Lauren Boebert, actually. And I think, you know, the fact that she has been subject to so much vitriol herself may have to do, you know, may have something to do with the fact, I don't know, but it could have something to do with the fact that as women, we understand the vitriol that especially happens. And if you don't want to catch any, then you shouldn't give any. And I think that's what Representative Greene encountered on Friday. If you don't want none, don't start none. And if you're not going to respect the rules, then it's going to come to you.
You have been very critical of the Biden administration's policy on Israel-Gaza, although quite also strenuous in your endorsement of the Biden-Harris ticket and the importance of electing, sort of balancing those two. At the top of the list of priorities, are there specific actions, specific things the Biden administration is not doing now that it should be doing that they have under their control?
I think this right here is an excellent question because there are things that are within our control when it comes to the bombardment and the outright famine that is precipitating in Gaza and unfolding genocide in Gaza. And there are things that are not in our control that the Netanyahu government is just barreling ahead towards. For example, I do not believe that it is constructive to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to a joint address of Congress. And many foreign leaders use this opportunity to lobby the entire Congress and the U.S. government for their own needs or for a certain view of their priorities. And I don't believe that that's a constructive role for us to be playing right now. I believe that we should be more thorough in enforcing a red line at Rafah. I believe that while there was one individual weapons transfer that was blocked, I think that we could be doing more to be investigating this. I believe that the sanctions with respect to the West Bank, we want to make sure that we are fully enforcing each and every one of the laws that we already have on the books to the fullest extent possible in order to rein in the aggression, as well as, I think, the extraordinary incentive that the Netanyahu administration has to continue its campaign in Rafah. They themselves have their own political pressures that they are responding to. And I think that is both domestic and international. And we have to make sure that we're not playing into that hand either.
I want to ask you one last question about the International Criminal Court, which is related to this. Obviously, you mentioned Netanyahu. There was an arrest warrant issued for him and the head of Hamas, the mastermind of the military wing of Hamas, Sinwar, who oversaw the operation on October 7th. There was bipartisan calls in the Senate to work on legislation to essentially sanction the International Criminal Court for that arrest warrant towards Netanyahu, not towards Sinwar. Anthony Blinken said that he would be amenable to working with a bipartisan group of senators to come up with legislation. Would you be interested in bipartisan legislation to sanction the International Criminal Court for its arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I would associate myself with some of our strongest allies, as well as other members, even within the United States Congress, that assert and respect the independence of the courts, the independence of the ICC. And what I find particularly disturbing about this attack on the ICC is that there is no particular set of evidence that has been presented by any member of any party as to any sort of reason why the ICC's conclusions are wrong or corrupted, or why the process may or may not have legitimacy. And the fact that we are simply attacking a court because we do not like its conclusion without any evidence to support that case creates, I think, an opening of hypocrisy, and it could potentially be a gift to adversaries of the United States. Because what prevents Putin, what prevents individuals from other authoritarians around the world from also disregarding an international body from trying to create accountability for war crimes anywhere else in the world? We have a responsibility in this moment to advance democracy and shore up democracy, not just here at home, but in order to be an example of a functioning democracy and upholding structures of democracy globally. And attacking the ICC is the exact opposite of what we should be doing right now.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents parts of Queens and the Bronx, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.